My son forgot to hang up the phone. That's the only reason I found out. 4 words came through that line and changed everything between us forever. He has to go. I didn't say a word back. 2 months later, my son and his wife came home from a business trip, smiling, right up until their key wouldn't turn in the lock. On the doorstep, they found an envelope with my handwriting on the front. When they opened it and read what was inside, they started screaming right there on the lawn. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 73 years old. For 38 years, I ran a small auto repair shop just outside Bend, Oregon, fixing engines and transmissions for anybody who walked through my door. I raised one son in the house on Cedar Hollow Road. I buried my wife from that house. I thought I'd die peacefully in that same house someday too. My son had other plans. This is the story of how I found out about them, and what I did before he ever got the chance to carry them out. My wife Alina passed away 2 years ago, on a cold January morning, right there in the bedroom we'd shared for 37 years. After the funeral, the house on Cedar Hollow Road felt too big and too quiet for one old man. Some mornings, I still made coffee for two out of habit before I caught myself. My son Curtis called every Sunday like clockwork, and about 6 months after Alina died, he showed up at my door with his wife Vanessa and a suggestion that sounded, at the time, like the kindest offer anyone had made me in years. "Dad, you shouldn't be rattling around this big house alone," he said, standing in my kitchen with his hands in his pockets. "Vanessa and I were talking. What if we moved in with you? Help out, keep you company, save on rent while we build up savings for our own place." I said yes before he even finished the sentence. Within 3 weeks, they packed up their apartment in Redmond and moved into the two spare bedrooms upstairs, the ones Alina and I had once hoped to fill with grandchildren. For the first few months, it really did feel like a blessing. Vanessa cooked most nights. Curtis fixed the gutters and mowed the lawn without me asking. We watched football together on Sundays the way we used to when he was a boy. And for the first time since Alina died, the house didn't feel so empty. I told my neighbor Stan across the street that I was the luckiest old man in Oregon, having my own son look after me like that. I had no idea that the man smiling across my dinner table every night was already counting down the days until the house belonged to somebody else, and that somebody wasn't going to be me. By the 6th month, small things started shifting, the kind of things you brush off because you don't want to believe what they might mean. Vanessa started calling the house ours instead of your dad's place when she talked to her sister on the phone. She swapped out the curtains Alina had picked years ago without asking me, said the old ones let in too much dust. Curtis started asking more about my pension, my savings, whether the house was paid off free and clear. It was, since 2009. I didn't think much of it. A son should know these things, I told myself. One night at dinner, Curtis mentioned that his old college friend Greg had just inherited his mother's house over in Sisters and sold it for close to $850,000. "Prices out here are just wild right now," he said, looking around my kitchen in a way that made the back of my neck go cold, though I couldn't have told you why at the time. Not long after, Vanessa started inviting a realtor friend of hers over for coffee, a woman named Rebecca, who I later learned had already given them an estimate on my house without my knowledge. Back when I thought she was just stopping by to be neighborly. Looking back now, I can see it all laid out clearly, like a map. Back then, I just saw a son and daughter-in-law settling into a routine and an old man grateful not to be alone. Hold onto that feeling of trust, because it's exactly what made it hurt so much when I finally understood what was happening under my own roof. About 8 months in, Curtis started saying things like, "Dad, you're forgetting more than you used to," even when I hadn't forgotten a thing. I misplaced my reading glasses one Tuesday, same as I had my whole life, and by dinner Curtis was telling Vanessa across the table, like I wasn't even sitting there, that he was getting worried about my memory. He started insisting on driving me to my doctor's appointments, even though I'd driven myself for 50 years without a single accident, and he'd sit in the room asking Doctor Osai pointed questions about cognitive decline, questions I hadn't asked and didn't need answered. Vanessa started leaving pamphlets on the kitchen counter, the kind with soft lighting and smiling grey-haired actors on the cover, places with names like Willowbrook Estates and Serenity Pines. When I asked her about them, she said, sweet as anything, "Oh, those are just for research, Walter, in case we ever need them down the road." Down the road. That's the phrase she used. I didn't argue. I didn't want to be the paranoid old man accusing his own family over a stack of glossy brochures. So I kept quiet, kept smiling, kept thanking them for looking out for me. But some part of me, the part that had spent 38 years reading people who lied to my face about their car troubles, started paying very close attention to every word coming out of my son's mouth. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in April. I'd gone out to the garage looking for an old socket wrench, puttering around the way old men do, when I heard Curtis's voice through the kitchen door I'd left cracked open. He was on the phone, talking low and fast, clearly thinking he was alone in the house. "No, listen," he was saying. "The doctor already said his memory's declining. That's on record now. That's what we need. Once we get him into Willowbrook, the paperwork practically signs itself. We're not talking about kicking him out. We're talking about him needing care. He can't get living alone with us working full time." I stood frozen in that garage doorway with a wrench in my hand, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he'd hear it through the wall. He kept going. "Rebecca already ran the numbers. With the market the way it is, we're looking at right around 850,000 for the house, maybe more if we list before fall. That covers his care for years and leaves plenty left over for us." Vanessa must have said something because Curtis laughed, actually laughed, and said, "He has to go." "That's just the reality of it, Vanessa. It's not personal. It's what makes sense for everybody. He has to go." 4 words. I stood in that garage for what felt like an hour but was probably 2 minutes, and I didn't make a sound. I set the wrench down as quiet as I'd picked it up, walked back through the yard, and sat on the porch steps in the April sun like nothing in the world had just changed, even though everything had. I want to be honest with you. My first instinct was to walk into that kitchen and ask my son what kind of man says he has to go about his own father, like I was an old couch nobody wanted anymore. But I didn't. 38 years of running a business teaches you something valuable, and it isn't how to fix an engine. It's how to keep your face calm when somebody's lying to you, so you can figure out exactly what they're planning before you say a single word. So that night at dinner, I ate Vanessa's pot roast and asked Curtis how work was going, same as always. I didn't mention the phone call. I didn't mention Willowbrook, or the $850,000, or the fact that my own son had just described getting rid of me the same way you describe scrapping a car that failed inspection. That night I didn't sleep, not 1 minute. I lay there going over every polite comment about those brochures, every doctor's appointment Curtis had suddenly started attending, every question about my pension and whether the house was paid off. It all lined up now, every piece of it, like a puzzle I'd been too trusting to see the shape of. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, lying in the house I'd owned since 1991, the house where I'd raised the same son who now wanted me gone, I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to accuse anybody of anything. I was simply going to find out exactly where I stood, legally, before they got the chance to make a move against me. The following Monday, I told Curtis I had a doctor's appointment across town and drove myself there in my own truck, a 2011 Ford F-150 I'd had for 13 years. Instead of the doctor's office, I drove to see a lawyer named Diane Foster, whose office sat above a bakery on Newport Avenue, recommended years ago by an old customer of mine. I sat across from her desk and told her everything: the phone call, the brochures, The questions about my finances, all of it laid out plain. Diane listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she pulled up the county records right there on her screen. Mr. Briggs, she said, I want you to understand something clearly. This house is deeded solely in your name. No one else is on that title, and unless you've signed a power of attorney or some other legal document, nobody can sell this house, admit you to a facility, or touch a single dollar of your money without your consent. Then she asked a question that made my stomach drop. Has your son asked you to sign anything recently? Anything he called insurance forms or medical authorizations? I remembered it instantly. A stack of papers Curtis had left on the kitchen table 2 weeks earlier, telling me they were just updated insurance documents for the house, needing my signature for the records. I hadn't gotten to them yet, kept putting it off because I don't sign anything without my reading glasses and a clear head. Diane asked me to bring those papers in immediately, and when I did, 3 days later, she confirmed exactly what we'd both started to suspect. They weren't insurance forms at all. They were a durable power of attorney, handing Curtis full legal control over my finances, my health care, and my home. I never signed it, and I never will. But finding it changed something in me. I wasn't just an old man being talked about behind his back anymore. I was a man whose own son had tried to trick him into signing away control of his own life over a stack of papers labeled to look boring and routine. Diane recommended a realtor she trusted completely, a sharp young woman named Monica Reyes, no connection to anyone Vanessa knew. Working out of the old mill district, with a reputation for moving houses fast and quiet when clients needed discretion. I met Monica at a coffee shop 2 miles from the house, paid cash for both our drinks, and told her I wanted to sell without my son or his wife knowing anything until it was already done. She didn't ask why. She just nodded like she'd heard this kind of story before, and told me a house like mine, 4 bedrooms, updated kitchen on a third of an acre, could realistically bring close to $850,000 if we moved quickly. I opened a new account at a credit union across town Curtis didn't know existed, had my mail redirected to a PO box, and started meeting Monica every Thursday afternoon, while Curtis and Vanessa thought I was at physical therapy for my knee. For the first time in months, I felt like I was holding the cards again, and it felt better than I can properly explain. To keep them relaxed and unsuspecting, I let them take me on a tour of Willowbrook Estates. I walked those hallways with the soft lighting and the smell of lemon cleaner, nodded politely at the activities calendar, even told the tour coordinator the dining room looked lovely, all while knowing I had no intention of ever living there. Curtis looked so pleased in the car afterward, telling Vanessa on speakerphone that Dad seemed really open to it. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Meanwhile, Monica had listed my house privately, off the big websites Curtis or Vanessa might stumble across, marketed only through word of mouth to serious buyers. Within 9 days, we had 3 offers. The best came from a young couple named Ryan and Sophie Whitfield, expecting their first baby, who fell in love with the backyard, where Curtis used to play catch with me 40 years earlier. Their offer came in at $850,000, all cash, flexible closing, no contingencies. Exactly the clean, fast deal Diane had told me to watch for. I sat in Monica's office and signed that agreement with a hand steadier than I expected, thinking about my son's voice in that garage saying, he has to go, like it was the easiest decision in the world. Well, Curtis, I remember thinking as I signed my name, somebody does have to go. Turns out it isn't going to be me. About 2 weeks later, Curtis came home from work glowing, the way he used to when he got picked for a team as a kid. His company was sending him and Vanessa to a conference in Chicago for 8 days, all expenses paid. Vanessa was already talking about the hotel spa and a steakhouse dinner downtown. It's actually perfect timing, Dad, Curtis told me over dinner, not realizing exactly how right he was. While we're gone, think more about Willowbrook. Maybe even put down a deposit before we get back. I told him I'd think about it, same calm voice I'd been using for weeks. Inside, I was doing the math. Closing could happen in as little as 12 days once both sides signed off, and the Whitfields, eager and pre-approved, were ready to move the moment I gave the word. Curtis and Vanessa left for the airport on a Sunday morning, suitcases by the door, Vanessa reminding me 3 separate times to water her orchids. I stood on the porch and waved as Curtis's car pulled out of the driveway, the same driveway he used to ride his bike down as a boy. The second that car turned the corner onto Birch Street and disappeared, I called Monica and told her one simple thing. Let's move the closing date up. Let's do it this week, while they're gone, before they ever get the chance to come home and stop what's already in motion. The closing happened on a Wednesday, 4 days into their trip, in a small conference room at the title company on Discovery Boulevard. Ryan and Sophie Whitfield sat across from me, Sophie's hand resting on her round belly, both of them practically bouncing about raising their child in that backyard. I signed page after page, feeling lighter with every signature. When it was done, Monica handed me a check for $850,000, minus fees and commission. More money than I'd ever seen in one place in my life. I'd already found my own new home, a bright, independent living condo at a community called Cedar Ridge Village, out in Sisters, with mountain views out every window and a woodworking shop in the basement I could use whenever I wanted. Nobody chose it off a glossy brochure. I chose it myself, walked through it myself, paid for it in cash myself, and signed my own name on my own lease. I spent that Wednesday afternoon and all of Thursday with 2 movers I'd hired quietly weeks in advance, packing up 40 years of my life. Elena's china, my father's old workbench, photographs off the walls, everything that actually mattered. I left the rest behind for the new owners, who were thrilled to take the furniture off my hands for a fair price. By Thursday evening, the house on Cedar Hollow Road belonged completely to Ryan and Sophie Whitfield. The locks had been changed by a locksmith Monica arranged, and I was sitting in my new living room in Sisters, watching the sun go down behind the mountains with a cup of coffee in my hand, feeling more peace than I had in over a year. Before I left Cedar Hollow Road for the very last time, I sat at the kitchen table Elena and I had eaten breakfast at for 37 years and wrote one final letter. Not to be cruel, just to be honest. I taped it to the front door, right at eye level, in an envelope with Curtis's name written in the same handwriting I used to sign his report cards. I told him I knew everything. That I'd been standing in the garage that Thursday in April with a wrench in my hand when I heard him tell Vanessa on the phone that I had to go, and that he'd talked about the $850,000 like it was already spent. I told him the house had been sold, fair and legal, to a wonderful young family who deserved it far more than 2 people who'd spent a year planning how to put their own father away. I told him I wasn't angry anymore, not really, just disappointed in a way that went deeper than anger ever could, and that I hoped someday he understood what it actually feels like to be the person somebody else decides is inconvenient. I told him not to bother trying the old numbers, since I'd already closed those accounts, but that I would answer if he ever called simply to say he was sorry and meant it. I signed it the way I'd signed every card to that boy since he was 7 years old. Love, Dad. Then I locked the door for the last time, got in my truck, and drove away without looking back once in the mirror. If I had known just how loud that scream on the lawn would be, I might have driven a little slower that day, just to picture it. But I didn't need to picture it. My neighbor, Stan, told me all about it weeks later. Curtis told me himself, though not until much later, that he and Vanessa pulled into the driveway that Sunday evening, still tan and relaxed from the trip. Vanessa already talking about unpacking and checking on her orchids. Curtis walked up to the front door with his key in hand, same as he'd done 10,000 times before, and it simply would not turn. He figured it was jammed, jiggled it, tried again, called out to Vanessa that something was wrong with the lock. That's when Sophie Whitfield opened the door from the inside, confused, holding her newborn daughter against her shoulder, asking Curtis who exactly he was and why he was trying to get into her house. According to Stan, who watched the whole thing unfold from his porch across the street, Curtis stood frozen on the steps for a long moment before he noticed the envelope taped beside the doorframe with his name on it. Stan said Vanessa read it first, standing on the front lawn in the fading evening light, and her hands started shaking about halfway through. Curtis grabbed the letter when she couldn't finish it, read the rest himself, and that's when the screaming started, right there on the lawn. Loud enough that 3 different neighbors came out onto their porches to see what was happening. Stan told me Vanessa dropped to her knees on the grass. Curtis just stood there holding that letter, staring at a house that no longer had a single thing inside it that belonged to him, in front of a young family he'd never met. On a street he'd thought he'd own free and clear within months. My phone started ringing 4 minutes later. I didn't answer, not that night. Curtis called me 31 times over the next 3 days. I let everyone go to voicemail, not out of cruelty, but because I wanted him to sit with exactly the feeling he'd been so ready to hand me. On the 4th day, sitting on my new balcony in Sisters with the mountains turning orange in the evening light, I finally picked up. His voice cracked the second I said hello. "Dad, please. We didn't mean it like that. We can fix this. Just tell us where you are." I let him talk for a while, let him get through the apologies and the excuses about stress and money and how things had just gotten away from them. When he finally stopped, I told him the truth as plainly as I could. I told him I'd heard every word of that phone call in April, that I knew about the power of attorney disguised as insurance forms, that I'd known exactly what Willowbrook and $850,000 meant to him and Vanessa for months before I said a single word about any of it. I told him I wasn't going to yell at him because he was still my son and I still loved him. But that love didn't mean I owed him a house I'd worked 38 years to pay off. Especially not after he'd decided on his own that I had to go. I told him I was happy, genuinely happy, in a place I'd chosen myself, surrounded by people my own age who respected me instead of planning around me. Before I hung up, I told him the door wasn't completely closed, not forever, but that it would only open again when he was ready to see me as his father again, and not as $850,000 standing in the way of his plans. I hung up the phone, set it on the table beside my coffee, and looked out at those mountains one more time, feeling, for the first time in longer than I could remember, completely and finally at peace. If you made it to the end of this one, you already know exactly what it feels like when a quiet man finally stops being quiet. So now I want to ask you, what would you have done in Walter's shoes? Would you have confronted them that same night, or would you have handled it quietly, the way he did? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, tell me where in the world you're watching this from. I always love reading where everyone's tuning in. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.